All right, this is a Las Vegas Sun podcast, The Rebel Room. I'm Brewer alongside Mike Grimala, and it's football season. We're back. We're ready to talk football. And Mike, I'm going to be honest. I have done this podcast with Ryan Green and then Taylor Byrne, and
greats.
Now you. I've done it with Case. And every year at this time, this week, after Media Day or before Media Day or during Media Day, we say, okay, bowl game, here we come. How do we get the 6 wins? Whether it was Mike Sanford or Bobby Houck or Tony Sanchez or Marcus Aurora, whose name I can't say, God bless that he's not there, and now Barry Odom. And we have the same optimism and the same roadblocks, and guess what? They never get there. But this year, 15 years into this podcast, they got a chance.
They got a chance. I'll agree with you. I'll go that far. They have a chance. They weren't far off last year. It took a lot to keep them out of a bowl last year. Most of it their own doing. They had to do a lot of things wrong to not get to 6 wins last year. So the gap from getting from 5-7 last year to 6-6 this year is not as big as it might otherwise be. You know, with a coach, usually when you fire your coach and you've got a whole, you're bringing in a new staff and new systems, you think, well, there's going to be some rebuilding and it's going to take some time. I think they could probably be competitive this year right away.
And I think one reason for that this year and every year is that it's not like the Mountain West is the Big Ten or the SEC. There's always going to be winnable games against like-minded teams. And when I say like-minded, I mean teams that are, largely recruiting 3-star recruits, hoping to develop them, or teams that are looking for, former 4-star recruits from Power 5 conferences to bounce back to populate their roster. But with the exception of Boise being really, really good for a lot of years and San Diego State pounding the rock and having, some double-digit wins strung together, you're largely facing teams like UNR or Hawaii or Wyoming or Colorado State or Air Force that are beatable and New Mexico. And because of that, you've got live action. And then you bring a coach in like Barry Odom, who's been a head coach at a Power 5 conference, who's been a coordinator at a Power 5 conference. And now all of a sudden, you've got an edge in the coaching box. And I think that makes a difference to where this is why I'm excited for this version of Rebel football.
You touched on what I think is probably the single biggest reason to be excited this year, if your goal is 6 wins, and that is the schedule. They have a very favorable schedule. If you just want to rack up wins, they avoid Boise State and they avoid San Diego State, which are the 2 best teams in the league. So you don't have to play either of them. 2 of their road games are the 2 worst teams in the conference. They play at New Mexico. They play at UNR. So there's a chance for a couple of road wins right there, which normally is asking UNLV to win 2 road games in conference is unthinkable. But because of the way the schedule works out, you don't have to play the 2 best teams. You got 2 soft road games that you could maybe steal. The schedule worked out very well for Barry Odom in his first year in terms of giving him a path to those 6 wins.
Yeah, so I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. And I guess I'm going to tease a little bit of story that's coming out tomorrow that you wrote, which is kind of like a roadmap to 6 wins in a bowl game. I worry about the non-league schedule, right? You open with Bryant September 2nd, should be a win, even though we've seen the Howards happen before, but should be a win. At Michigan the next week should be a loss. You're 1-1. And then you get Vandy of the SEC here September 16th at home. A very interesting opponent. A few years ago, UNLV went to Nashville, beat Vanderbilt, but it's still an SEC team that theoretically has better players. And I'm not sure what happens there. And then UTEP on the road again, a like-minded team, but UTEP coming off of, I think, a 6-win season or a 5-win season is definitely much improved.
Yeah, Vanderbilt 5-7 last year, UTEP 5-7, UNLV 5-7. So they're all kind of in that same zone. And yeah, I'm thinking the same thing as you. You know, you beat Bryant, you lose to Michigan. You've got to win one of those next two non-conference games. If you get to 2-2 in non-conference, that's great. You're on your way. If you go 1-3, that kind of puts you behind the eight ball. You're probably going to be chasing that win for the rest of the schedule. So whether in those Vanderbilt and UTEP games back-to-back, in back-to-back weeks, can they split that? Can they get one of those? That's probably the first real big question that they have to answer. Because like I said, those are not terrible teams. They're not great teams. They're in that same zone as UNLV that probably be fighting for bowl spots this year. Can you split that and get one of them? And I don't know. That Vanderbilt game at home looks pretty good. But yeah, I don't know. I just don't know.
Yeah, and that's the one thing I do need to talk about is, or that I needed to talk about, that I'd like to say is that if that Vandy game was at Vandy and UTEP was at home, then maybe you'd be 2-2. But having a better team in Vanderbilt come into your place and then having to go, that's the thing. Can you sneak up? And we're talking about Vanderbilt, the worst team in the SEC, but I mean, and the UNLV, mind you, was a 15-point dog when they beat them 34-10 in Tony Sanchez's last year.
They did. So it's those are both winnable games. So if you're Barry Odom and you're trying to prove it right away in year one, that you probably got to get one of those two games. That's a way that would prove it, and I think get people on your side early. If you go 2-2 in conference play, and you're set up for, the Mountain West, you get one of those wins, whether it's at home against Vanderbilt, that would get people excited. Whether you go on the road and win at UTEP, people that would be a pretty sizable quality win for, from UNLV's perspective. One of those games, I'm not asking that. Where the Mountain West schedule shook out really nicely for UNLV this year, the non-conference schedule, you might have wanted one more cupcake in there, don't you think?
I would agree. And I like that word, cupcake, because UTEP to me is like a slice of apple pie. A little better than cupcake, right?
Yeah. It makes me nervous. That, I could totally see them going 1-3 in non-conference play, and it kind of flattens out that enthusiasm that you're trying to build early in the year. So that's what they've got to avoid.
Yeah. And I guess we're talking about potential hiccups. And the biggest one is, so obviously they've got an established quarterback in Doug Brumfield. And when he's healthy, he's very good. And for all intents and purposes, he's been killing it in the offseason. But if he gets hurt, then all of a sudden the UNLV is a 5.5 win team. I think goes down to 3.5. Is that being fair?
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously by far the most important player on the team. I was looking at his stats. I had forgotten just how hot he was to start the year. Through those, when they went 4-1 to start the year, he was, 1,200 yards passing, 13 total touchdowns. He was on pace for a really, really good year. You could have seen him, almost 3,000 yards passing or 3,000 yards total offense with the rushing included, 30 touchdowns. He was on pace for a really, really good season. He gets hurt. He gets banged up. When he plays in the second half of the year, he just wasn't as good. He just didn't have it. You could tell. If that happens again, the guys that are backing him up are mostly the same cast of characters. I don't think that they have anyone that's going to step in and give them what Brumfield can give them from a playmaking standpoint. So it's one of the things that Odom talked about at Media Day was that, tried to put weight on Doug Brumfield this offseason. He said, I forget exactly, I think he said like 17 or 18 pounds they've put on him of quote-unquote good weight. So maybe that will help him absorb some hits a little bit better. But yeah, if he goes down, they're in trouble again. But on the flip side, if they can get 12 games out of him, or even just like 11 games, maybe he'll miss one somewhere. But if you can get most of a full season out of him, that's the biggest factor.
Yeah. So the other the other question I have for you, because you have better insight than I do, but Barry Odom's a defensive guy, right?
Yes.
He used to be the D coordinator at Arkansas. His impact on the defense, how is that going to – because if they could just have light improvement there, then who knows, sky's the limit. Here's a guy, Barry Odom, who was a defensive coordinator at Arkansas. He's known more as a defensive coach. Is that going to help in the grand scheme of things? Or is the personnel just a year off from being developed?
It's both. It's personnel. It's got to be personnel and coaching. Like last year, UNLV was pretty good with, turnovers and takeaways. They were top 20 in the country in takeaways. But as the season went on, they just had no depth. They fell apart as they slowed down. During that losing streak to end the season, they couldn't get a stop. They just could not get off the field, allowing 32, 33 points a game. I think 3 games they allowed 40 points. They couldn't stop anyone. So what you're hoping for from Odom is that, they may not generate as many turnovers early in the year, but you're hoping that there's more consistency throughout the season. Like, you don't want to see them fall off a cliff. They're not going to be a great defense. They're not going to win games on the back of their defense, I don't think, anyways. But can they just be a little bit more consistent? Like, don't give up 40 every other week across the second half of the season. Like, what can Odom do to manage the roster, to manage the depth chart, to keep them from wearing down so quickly and just being so ineffective? Like, if that means substituting more early in the year, maybe, you want to play your starters and your guys because it gives you the best chance to win, but do you make that sacrifice where, hey, we're going to rotate a little bit more to keep guys fresh? I don't know how he does it, how Odom's going to approach it, but they've got to find a way to get through this season with a thin depth chart, which is to be expected in any coach's first year. You're probably going to be thin. Can they get through 12 games without having that massive drop-off that just killed them last year?
And that's the other thing, Mike. It's that attrition in any college football season with any program, by time the calendar flips to November, you're playing with guys that you didn't think you'd have to use.
Well, perfect example. Last year, Naki Fahina, he's a starting defensive tackle. He's one of your leaders, one of your core guys. He goes out in week 1 and breaks his foot, and he's gone for the rest of the year. So whoever your number 2 D tackle was, your next 11 games, everyone bumps up a spot like immediately. So like your depth is tested throughout the year. It only takes a couple injuries to throw everything out of whack. So it's tough to manage. Like UNLV they were a good defense last year, and they were a horrible defense last year, and they were both things depending on when you caught them in the season. So you just kind of can Odom find somewhere in the middle that you can rely on them to give you a certain baseline of production week in and week out.
Yeah, and the one thing is that with any coaching change, there's a lot of great energy in year one. Now, we might not have seen that with Coach Aurora because of COVID, right? And that first year was 6 games, no fans, whatever the scenario may be. But there's, I think, some decent little momentum right now for UNLV football, right? New coach, you've got the stadium, the roster seems to be slightly in a better situation than it has been in the year past.
Good quarterback.
If they could somehow go 3-1,
Oof.
right? Losing to Michigan.
You're asking for the world. You're asking for the world there. You're getting greedy.
I'm saying somehow, somehow, right? I mean, they were 4-1 last year.
They did it last year. I'll give you that.
Yeah, it just seems like to me that, they've got a really good wide receiver in Ricky White, right?
Yes.
They've got a great coach. They're paying more for their coaching staff than any other team in the league. They have arguably the best facilities than any other team in the league. They return, I don't know where it compares to other teams in the league, but they seem to have a good thing of returners. I just don't know why they can't pull it off, in my opinion.
I don't think there's reasons why they can't. If you were to ask me, like, what are the biggest stumbling blocks, like what are the roadblocks, I would say one is that depth. I think just a handful of injuries at key spots could probably wipe out their season. And then, like, two, I would say just like they're installing a new offense. Doug Brumfield has shown flashes in the past, but the next step for a quarterback is, does he win you games like late in game? Like UNLV was terrible in close games last year. They lost pretty much every close game they played. A lot of that was the coaching staff. They didn't know how to coach close and late situations. And some of that is they didn't have a good quarterback play late in the year. If they're down by 4 points at home against Vanderbilt with 4 minutes left, there's not a lot of your coaching has put you in a position to win the game. Now can Doug Brumfield go out and win that game? One of the things we haven't seen him do yet is go and win a game late with a late drive or a couple late touchdowns, or just like see him take over a game. And really the quarterback's the only guy that can do that for you consistently. So do they have a quarterback that can win you those games when it comes down to a coin flip at the end? And can they avoid those just devastating injuries at, quarterback, left tackle, cornerback, the positions that are really going to hurt you if your frontline guys go down?
Yeah. To go back a few topics, Case Kiefer just texted with Case. He thinks Vandy's going to be about a 5.5-point favorite, and UNLV a 2-point favorite at UTEP. He also says, and he knows a little more than you and me on this, Vandy game not a great spot for UNLV because they're going to be coming off the Michigan trip, right? So they could get banged up.
Yeah, they're going to be beat up for sure.
Yeah.
So, but those lines are pretty much what you were saying. Like, those are both winnable games. So, does that sway you one way or the other? Does that sway you to putting more emphasis on that UTEP game?
Yeah. He also says UTEP has some hype, but UNLV's a better roster. He wouldn't be shocked if the line goes up in UNLV's favor, the betting number. So maybe, but that game is going to be, in my opinion, the linchpin of the season, right? Because you're going to be 1-2 theoretically, right? Beat Bryant, lose to Michigan, lose to Vandy. UTEP game is the swing game. You win it, you're on track. You lose it, you're going to have to finish strong.
Because also, if you look at the two games immediately following UTEP, Hawaii at home, UNR on the road, those should both be wins. So if you win that UTEP game, you get a little 3-game winning streak going, you're back over 500. Like, you can really start building some momentum, but it's got to start with that UTEP game. I think you're probably right about that.
Yeah. He also said, lastly, on the Vandy game, they play they play Wake Forest the week before.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing or neutral?
Good thing for us because they're going to want to win that game. So, I mean, it is what it is. It's just, you've been around long enough, Mike, to know that crazy things happen in Mountain West play. And maybe that benefits UNLV this year for all the reasons we've talked about, but don't do that thing 1-3. And then, because UNLV, if there is anything I've learned over the last whatever years, is they're going to lose a game that they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
Right? We saw that at Hawaii. And it's bound to happen. I don't know if it's going to be, I don't know who it's going to be against, but, could they go in and beat Michigan, Mike?
No.
Why
not? The depth. Michigan, big, strong, and it's not like a gimmicky team that's going to make mistakes to let you win. They're just going to pound the ball, and they're just going to run right through UNLV.
Michigan's coming off their national semifinal game. They've got a Heisman player at quarterback. But I always think about Michigan losing to App State at home or Akron at home.
That happened.
Right?
That did happen.
And could UNLV be the next?
I think it would. I think it's more likely to look like the UNLV at Notre Dame game last year, where UNLV went in. It's a different point in the season. It was later in the year, so UNLV went in banged up. Brumfield, obviously didn't play. But I feel like that game is going to play out similarly, where Michigan is just bigger, stronger. They'll lean on UNLV, and then the score is just going to widen as the game goes on. That's how I see it. But I mean, you're right in the sense that I've seen UNLV win games that I didn't think in a million years they would have a chance to win, and I've seen them lose games in a million years you would think they had no chance of losing. So, I mean, I would never completely rule them out, but I would probably 99% rule them out of winning at Michigan.
Okay, so games, you bring up a good, let's play a little, you just brought up a good question. Game they should have, you said you've seen them lose games, and you've seen them lose games they should have won and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
The biggest game you've seen them win where they should have lost?
I'm probably not good with details. There's two that come to mind. I hope I'm not missing one.
Go ahead. Go first.
At Fresno State with Johnny Stanton playing quarterback.
That's one of mine, absolutely.
It was the night before Halloween, I believe, one year. And then at San Diego State, when Lexington Thomas went crazy and broke 2 long touchdowns in the second half, and they won that game. Those are the two that I think of immediately. There may be some other ones that are slipping my mind right now, but those are the two that I remember distinctly.
So I remember, and I'm really going to be dating myself, but it was 02 or 03. Jason Thomas is the quarterback. Or no, maybe UNLV beat Colorado State at Colorado State, and I think 02. And maybe I'm trying to find out who was the quarterback of that team. UNLV football beats ranked Colorado State. Gosh darn it. And then it was 2002. November 30th, 2002, they beat them. That's not true. They lost that year. I'm trying to find out when this game was. And then do you remember when they beat Wisconsin with Jamal Brewer?
I don't. I know the game you're talking about. It was before my time, but I know the game you're talking about.
Okay. That was a big win. I think Wisconsin was ranked. and they were loaded, and Jamal Brewer and those guys went in there and just absolutely handed it to them. And the UNLV game was 2001. 2000. They beat Colorado State 20-19 at Colorado State. Those were the two big ones for me. And then, unfortunately, games they lost that they should have won, or games they had no reason losing. Howard and Southern Utah at home, freaking embarrassing. Those are my two.
Yeah, Howard obviously was the worst, and that's, you can't start your season like that. And then Hawaii from last year with, just it got the coaching staff fired losing that game. So, those are the two that probably jump into my mind as games that I never thought they would lose, and they found a way to kick it away. And also, I will also throw in that Eastern Washington opener, another home opener, where they were a gigantic favorite and they ended up losing in overtime. So that's another one. So
yeah, but that was like the first game fans after COVID. I was at that game. Marcus Aurora was such a bad hire. I mean, I hate to say that about somebody who had such a great offensive pedigree, but
he was bad. He was a bad coach, and that game in particular, they had a quarterback battle throughout the offseason, and he just picked the wrong guy. He didn't know how to evaluate quarterbacks. That was one of his weaknesses that hurt him throughout his time at UNLV. He wasn't good at coaching quarterbacks. He couldn't evaluate the position. Brumfield was the only quarterback they brought in that was any good, and that was a Tony Sanchez recruit. Maybe that's why they tried to bury him on the depth chart. But that Eastern Washington game, he started Justin Rogers, and he stuck with him for so long. He stuck with him into the second half when he was doing nothing. Then they put in Brumfield late, and it was touchdown drive, force overtime, touchdown in overtime, and I think they lost in double OT. But that's 100% a coaching loss. So, when you say Barry Odom's an upgrade, more so than there's the X's and O's in the scheme and all that stuff, but then there's just common sense stuff that if he gets right, just starting the right quarterback, calling a timeout when it's obvious to call a timeout, going for it on fourth down when you should go for it on fourth down. You can add a win or two each season just by by having regular coaching instead of bottom of the barrel coaching.
Yeah, and you're 100% right on that. It's weird because you're talking about quarterback. Obviously, I was a huge Kenyon Oblad fan, local kid, born and raised. And when we were talking about that Vandy game, he was 12 of 15 for 2 touchdowns in that day.
In 2019?
Whenever they won 34-10, with him as the quarterback.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so.
Oh yeah, he was.
Right, had a great day against those guys, obviously. So it is what it is. It is what it is. But like I said, we've got live action in terms of potentially getting to a bowl. 1, because the Mountain West is awful. 2, because there's a lot of bowls. And 3, because UNLV has got a great coach. So without even playing a game, UNLV's got live action, which, going back to what I opened with, my 15 years, that's very interesting. So closing thoughts as we get out of here?
Closing thoughts. I think they're going to win 6 games. I think I could see them getting to 6. I mean, I could see that. Yeah, if you pressed me right now, I would say 6.
All right. Well, I, who usually am more confident, don't have them getting there. I just think they're going to end up going 1-3, and then you're looking to have to win 5 of your final 8 games, which for a team that's awful on the road with a lack of Jimmys and Joes on the 2s and the 3s is tough. I think they come up short, but set a great foundation. And again, as long as they beat Reno, who cares?
How do you feel about that Reno game getting moved up from no longer the season finale? Now they're playing it. It's the second game of the conference schedule. Do you care at all?
What day is that?
It's on October 14th.
My thoughts on the Reno game is either A, you play it over Nevada Day weekend, which is that last weekend in October, or B, you keep it on Thanksgiving weekend. But the fact that it's October 14th is a slap in the face to the state and to the history of UNLV.
Does it impact the game itself? Do you think the UNLV's got a better chance or worse? Are you worried about them getting up for that game given its placement? Do you feel because UNLV it was the final game of last year, and even though UNLV was kind of eliminated, they rallied to win that game. They played hard. Are you worried that they might is any of that enter your mind, or you just think it's a slap in the face to the fans?
So for me, I think the early game favors. It could favor UNLV because Reno is going to have nothing to play for at the end of the year, and they would treat it like a bowl game in their home stadium when it's colder in November. Now the weather will still be manageable in the second week of October, and Reno still will think it has something to play for. So this could benefit UNLV, in my opinion.
And UNLV will be coming off a bye, so you'll probably get, hopefully a healthy Doug Brumfield running around, putting up big numbers in that game. So, okay.
Yeah, but it has to be – you have to win that game. Again, the last two UNLV football coaches that were fired had beat Reno as their last act. So, anyways, great Rebel Room. I'm glad that we finally got back. For Mike, I'm Ray. Thank everybody for following our coverage. And we look forward to another great football season of UNLV athletics. Thank you, Michael.